Well, good afternoon and welcome. We just had a coalition meeting of a number of members of Congress and of key grassroots leaders across the country who gathered here today, united in opposition to this catastrophic Iranian nuclear deal. The grassroots leaders who came together came from across the political spectrum. There were conservative leaders, there were pro-Israel leaders, there were leaders of the Jewish community, there were leaders in the Christian community. All stand together, convinced that the threat of a nuclear Iran is the single greatest national security threat facing America. All stand together convinced that this Iranian nuclear deal is a catastrophic mistake. If this deal goes through, a number of things will happen. Number one, over $100 billion will flow to Iran. Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. Much of that money will flow directly to Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and other radical Islamic terrorists. Much of that money will be used to fund radical Islamic terrorism. Indeed, if this deal is consummated, it will make the Obama administration the world's leading financier of radical Islamic terrorism. Billions of dollars under control of this administration will flow into the hands of jihadists who will use that money to murder Americans, to murder Israelis, to murder Europeans. Now, yesterday in Africa, President Obama chose to take issue with my pointing out that incontrovertible fact. He belittled and attacked it and said it was intemperate to say such a thing. I would note nowhere in President Obama's remarks did he dispute the underlying facts. Nowhere in President Obama's remarks did he point to any other organization on the face of the globe that would be a larger global financier of radical Islamic terrorism than the Obama administration is trying to become. In addition to that consequence, this deal leaves 4 American hostages languishing in Iranian hellholes. It leaves Pastor Saeed Abedini, an American pastor, sentenced to 8 years in prison for professing his Christian faith. It leaves Amir Hekmati, an American Marine, wrongfully imprisoned. It leaves Jason Rezaian, a reporter, imprisoned for doing his job reporting on the news. I would note to all of our friends from the media, it ought to give you pause that this administration is content to leave a reporter from the Washington Post in an Iranian hellhole. And it leaves Robert Levinson, an American whose whereabouts are unknown right now. But the single gravest consequence of this deal, if it goes through, is that it will only accelerate Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. Iran is led by a theocratic zealot, the Ayatollah Khamenei, who leads chants of death to America, who refers to Israel as the little Satan and refers to America as the great Satan. Now, I agree with Prime Minister Netanyahu that this deal, that the threat of a nuclear Iran is an existential threat to the nation of Israel, meaning that if Iran acquires nuclear weapons, the odds are unacceptably high they would use those nuclear weapons in the skies of Tel Aviv or New York or Los Angeles. And the threat that is posed to the United States of America is even qualitatively greater. The single greatest threat, if Iran acquired even a single nuclear weapon, would be that they would place that weapon on a rocket, on a ship anywhere up and down the Atlantic. And they would fire that rocket straight in the air into the atmosphere. And if it got high enough and they could detonate a nuclear warhead, it would set off what's called an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP. An EMP would take down the electrical grid on the entire eastern seaboard, would shut down the stock exchange and all of our financial system, would shut down the delivery of food and water and heat and air and basic transportation. The projections are that an EMP over the eastern seaboard would cost the lives of tens of millions of Americans. And they don't need targeting equipment. They don't need to hit a target. They need to fire it straight in the air. That is one nuclear weapons in the hands of Iran. And I would note, Iran is a nation every year that celebrates a holiday. It's an unusual holiday to Americans. Here in America, we celebrate the 4th of July, we celebrate Thanksgiving, we celebrate Christmas. In Iran, they have a holiday called Death to America Day. It is the anniversary of Iran seizing Americans hostages in the 1970s. And they gather outside by the thousands and chant Death to America. If history teaches anything, it is that if somebody tells you they want to kill you, believe them. This gathering we had of grassroots leaders collectively touched millions of Americans all across this country. And it is our intention, both the members gathered here and the grassroots leaders who participated in this meeting, to make the month of August a referendum on this catastrophic Iranian deal. It is my hope that millions of Americans light up the phones to Capitol Hill. Light up the phones to Democratic members of Congress, members of the House, and members of the Senate, to say, stand in support of U.S. national security, stand in support of the nation of Israel, stand in support of protecting the health and safety of millions of Americans. This deal on the merits is indefensible. As I mentioned, President Obama attacked my statement that his administration would become the world's leading financier of terrorism yesterday. I invited President Obama to participate in a debate. I would be happy to debate him at the time and place of his choosing, anywhere in the country in the next 60 days, to discuss the substance of this deal. If he believes that this deal can be defended, I would encourage him to defend it in front of the American people. And if he's unwilling to do so, then he can send as his proxy Secretary of State John Kerry. Because on the merits, this deal is catastrophic for the American people. And I'm encouraged that the grassroots leaders, coming from very different ideological positions, are united that we shouldn't abandon our hostages in Iran. That we shouldn't send billions of dollars to fund jihadists to murder Americans. And that we should do nothing to facilitate Iran acquiring nuclear weapons while they pledge death to America and pose a mortal threat to murder untold numbers of Americans. Congressman Zeller.
Well, thank you, Senator Cruz. Really a lot of strong, important, effective leadership that has resulted in such an amazing collection of voices and leaders this afternoon. So I thank you for bringing everybody together. There's so much that isn't even part of the deal. As Senator Cruz points out, Iran overthrowing foreign governments, financing terror, developing ICBMs, unjustly imprisoning American citizens, including the United States Marine, a pastor, a reporter, pledging to wipe Israel off the map, chanting death to America. None of this was even part of the negotiations. Secretary Kerry was before the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He was before the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee recently as well. There is an alternative other than war, and it's a better deal. And if Secretary Kerry, President Obama, the entire administration had to wake up the next day after Congress was to reject a bad deal, I'm confident that with the strength of American greatness, with American exceptionalism, that we would prevail, that better deal would be pursued and effectively achieved. And a lot of sacrifice through generations of Americans who have fought and died to make this nation the greatest nation in the world was surrendered by Secretary Kerry's capitulation to the Iranians. It saddens me that we're in this position now. I would encourage congressional Democrats who know what the right thing is to choose national security over party loyalty. We need voices like Senator Chuck Schumer or Congressman Steve Israel, who, if there was a Republican in the White House, would be the most outspoken members of Congress against this deal, to show some leadership, some backbone, to stand up, and lead as Senator Cruz is, and I thank him again for allowing me to be part of this afternoon.
Thank you. Congressman Go.
Thank you, Senator. And that was an amazing group that you gathered together. So many different walks of life, but everybody committed to the same position, and that is that this upcoming vote on the Iran deal will be the most important vote that anybody in the House or Senate takes, that it will be. Now, this is a treaty. There is no question about it. If it were an executive agreement, then it would be off in no time. It would not be enforceable. They're treating it as a treaty. It is a treaty. The Constitution says that means 2/3 should be required to ratify it. But we are where we are, and there's a vote coming up, and Congress can reject this deal. And there are alternatives, because if the sanctions got Iran to this point, then the sanctions can still work. And as the senator has pointed out before, this administration can't have it both ways. If the sanctions can snap back and be effective down the road, if Iran's found to violate, which they will, then it can be effective snapping back tomorrow or September. Either they will work snapback or they won't. And if they won't, then the deal needs to be rejected. And if they will, the deal needs to be rejected. It's just evidence of how bad a deal it is. And there's just no question, there shouldn't be any question in anybody's mind, that when people have been willing to kill the thousands of Americans that this Iranian leadership has been willing to kill, then they would love to kill tens of thousands, millions. And this is not just a matter of a threat against Israel. This is a threat to the United States of America. And I hope that we will have enough people on the other side of the aisle who will step up, as some of us Republicans have, when we weren't happy with the Bush administration, when we weren't happy with we don't care if it's a bad deal. Put party differences aside and step up for America, and it will be beneficial to Israel as well.
Jenny Beth Martin.
Tea Party, I'm Jenny Beth Martin with Tea Party Patriots. Tea Party Patriots got involved in this because we care about the Constitution, and when we see that it is being violated, we normally step up and talk about it. In this instance, if it looks like a treaty and acts like a treaty, it should be treated as a treaty. And we maintain that this deal should actually be treated like a treaty. With that said, as we began looking at the details of it, we realized this poses an existential threat to the United States. It doesn't prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. It all but guarantees that they will. And other countries in the region in the Middle East are not going to sit by idly while Iran has a nuclear weapon, so it virtually guarantees a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. I'm the mom of 12-year-old twins. In a decade from now, when my son and daughter are graduating from college, I don't want them going into the world as adults with a nuclear-armed Iran and a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Tea Party Patriots opposes this deal, and we'll be making our voices heard throughout the coming weeks.
Thank you, Jenny Beth. Penny Nance.
I'm Penny Nance. I'm the CEO and President of Concerned Women for America. And again, I'm Penny Nance. I'm the CEO and President of Concerned Women for America. We're the nation's largest public policy women's organization. We have about 500,000 members around this country. We have 400 adult chapters, 20 college chapters. And we feel very strongly that this is an issue of national security. You know, Josh Earnest the other day called a rally that we hosted a pro-war rally. And it's just the opposite. If he had taken the time to look out the window of the White House, he would have seen women of faith join together praying for our country, praying for peace, praying for protection for Israel, and praying for the release of 4 Americans that had been left behind. Specifically, Pastor Saeed Abedini. We will not forget any of them. We will continue this conversation, and we oppose this deal. Our ladies will be and are calling their congressmen and their senators. We'll be coming to Washington. We'll be going to town hall meetings. We'll go into their local offices and expressing their deep concern. We are mothers. Some of us are grandmothers. We are future mothers. We care about peace more than anyone. And so it is out of deep concern for the safety of our children and our grandchildren that we come to this position. And we urge others to follow our leadership, and we're joining with you, Senator. Thank you for today.
Thank you, Penny. Frank Gaffney.
I'm Frank Gaffney with the Center for Security Policy. And, Senator, I want to thank you for your leadership in pulling this group together. There have been many of us who've been working on these issues, these national security issues, for a long time. But it's taken really, I think, the initiative that you've mounted today to pull together this spectrum of experts and practitioners to begin what we hope will be a very successful campaign against this defective deal. As an old Scoop Jackson Democrat, I very much resonate to the comments that several of you have made about the importance of Democrats putting the national security first. I know my old boss certainly would have, were he alive today, he would be leading, I believe, the effort to ensure that this deal was rejected. I want to just address one argument that we are hearing a lot from the administration and that, unfortunately, a number of Democrats have espoused. It's sort of the flip side of what several of you have talked about, that there is an alternative. I want to suggest that when the administration says, at least implicitly, we're not at war now, that is a fundamental mischaracterization of our present situation. Tragically, we've been at war with Iran since 1979. We just haven't acknowledged. They say it, they act on it, and they're going to continue to act on it. And if at every turn we continue to ignore the warnings of even worse to come, enabled by 100 billion or more, by one estimate we heard 600 billion, all in, that will be flowing to the Iranians to make war. I'm fearful, I must tell you, that that war will not just be manifested in a nuclear arms race, it will be manifested in a thermonuclear war. And it won't be confined to the Middle East, I fear, for precisely the reason you mentioned at the outset, Senator. There is an existential threat to the United States. The Iranians are practicing delivering an EMP attack against us. It is part of their doctrine. They have put all of the capabilities needed to engage in it in place, with presumably the exception of a nuclear weapon, and they may well be at the threshold of that. This is a deal that must be stopped, and we must take a different course for the nation's security, as well as, I think, that of the world. So thank you again, Senator.
Mort Klein.
Well, thank you, Senator. I was just in Israel meeting with officials there, and I told them to stop using the term, this is a bad deal. I said, you must use the term, this is a catastrophic deal. Bad we can live with. Catastrophe is a lot more difficult. That's what this is. It not only provides hundreds of billions of dollars to the biggest armor and funder of Islamic terrorism in the world, which means we will have a dramatic increase in Islamic terrorism all over the world. Europe, America, the Middle East, because of the funds these radical Islamics will get. And we have to understand that their goal is a cataclysmic war. They say so, because they believe with a cataclysmic war is how they will get the Mahdi to come back, the Islamic Messiah, and then the world will suddenly end up being under Islamic rule. This is their goal, this is their interest. As Bernard Lewis of Princeton once said, with the Russians, mutually assured destruction was a deterrent. With the Iranians, mutually assured destruction is an incentive. Because tragically, this is their philosophy. In fact, their constitution says that they want all governments to fall and they end up running the world. It's in their constitution, the preamble to the Constitution. So it's not only nukes. And I'm also very upset that Secretary Kerry, only on Friday, we met with him on Friday, said to us, this stops them from getting nuclear weapons for at least 10 years. And then we'll be in the same place we are now. But this is false.